Good morning and welcome to our Through a Veteran's Eye, a Salute. I am Tammy Boylan and I have had the privilege again this year to be the chairperson of this salute, working alongside our wonderful committee. And so today, as we gather to honor the brave men and women who have served our country with courage and selflessness, to our veterans, we extend our deepest gratitude for your services and your sacrifices for which have preserved our freedoms. Your commitment and dedication inspire us all. On this special day, we come together as a community to celebrate not just your achievements, but the unwavering spirit you represent. You remind us of the strength, resilience, and unity that define our nation. Thank you for your service. At this time, I would like to introduce Krista Geer, who is Active Aging's Executive Director, to say a few words.
Good morning. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone as we gather to celebrate our military veterans. Today we are here not just to commemorate a date on the calendar, but to pay tribute to the brave men and women who have served our country with honor and sacrifice. In many ways, veterans may seem to be ordinary, everyday people, yet veterans are built differently, with parts that equal a sum greater than the ordinary. The veteran possesses a mind drawn to situation others would avoid, that knows how to think strategically, solve problems under pressure, and make critical decisions in the blink of an eye. A mind that holds wisdom and understanding of what truly matters and what is worth fighting for. They have a heart that beats with courage and compassion for those they stand beside and those they've sworn to protect. A heart that holds a deep and abiding love and sense of integrity and duty. The back of a veteran carries the weight of their experiences and has withstood pressures that might break others. Their back has been bent in service, yet still stands straight, made so by the dignity of their sacrifice. The hands of a veteran have lifted heavy burdens and are calloused by hard work and selflessness. Veterans have chosen to take the ordinary things bestowed upon us all and make them extraordinary. Veterans Day is a time for reflection, gratitude, and remembrance. We stand here because of your courage and commitment. You've faced challenges that many of us cannot imagine, and you've done so with a strength that inspires us all. As we honor your service, let us also recognize the families who have supported you along the way. Their sacrifices are often felt just as deeply, and they too deserve our heartfelt thanks. Throughout today's program, we'll hear stories of bravery, resilience, and camaraderie. These stories remind us of the values of duty, honor, and country that transcend time and are passed down through generations. As we reflect on the sacrifices made, let us also pledge to support our veterans, not just today, but every day. Let us strive to ensure that they receive the care, the respect, and the opportunities that they deserve. Thank you for being here to celebrate this important occasion. Thank you to our veterans for your service, your sacrifices, and your unwavering dedication to our freedom. Let us honor you with gratitude and our commitment to uphold the values you fought to protect, never forgetting those who paid the ultimate sacrifice, the last full measure of devotion to guarantee our freedoms and our country never die. Thank you very much, and I have the honor of introducing Susan Santiago from Vantage. Susan.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to say a few words that will just reflect exactly what we're hearing so far this morning. Today, we gather to pay tribute to the brave men and women who served our nation with unwavering courage and dedication. Veterans Day is not just a date on the calendar. It is a profound reminder of the sacrifices made by those who don the uniform, defending our freedoms and our way of life. As we look around, we see a wealth of experience and wisdom. Many of you have lived through significant moments in history, and some of you have served in the military yourselves. Your stories and experiences are invaluable, and they remind us of the significant impact that service has on our lives and our communities. Veterans Day is a time for reflection. It is a moment to remember the sacrifices made by those who fought for our freedoms. Each veteran carries a unique story, and I've heard a few already, so there's some good ones for sure. Stories of bravery, resilience, and brotherhood. Whether they served in distant lands or closer to home, their dedication to protecting our rights and way of life is something we must never take for granted. Let us also remember the families of our veterans. They too have made sacrifices, waiting anxiously for loved ones to return home, supporting them through challenges of service, and often facing the realities of loss. To the families, we extend our deepest gratitude. Today, we have the opportunity to hear from some remarkable individuals who have served our country. Their stories will inspire us and remind us of the strength of the human spirit. Each story is a testament to the resilience and bravery that define our veterans. As we celebrate Veterans Day, let us carry the spirit of gratitude in our hearts. Let us honor our veterans, not just today, but every day, and recognize their sacrifices and support them in our communities. Thank you for being here today to celebrate this important day, and have a happy Veterans Day. Thank you all, and enjoy your time. Thanks. Thank you.
I would like to introduce Jane Ellen Nickel from the Unitarian Church to give our invocation this morning.
Good morning. Will you pray with me? Holy God, creator of us all, our gracious Heavenly Father, we invoke your presence with us in this Veterans Day gathering. We come before you with gratitude for all those who have served, for the sacrifices they have made, for putting country before self, for putting their lives on the line to defend the freedoms and rights that we all enjoy. On this day set aside to honor them, we pray that they would feel honored and would know our enduring gratitude for their service. We give thanks for their families who support them when they are deployed for long stretches and as they transition back home. We lift special prayers for those who have lost loved ones through military service. May we as a nation prove worthy of their sacrifice. We pray for healing for veterans who are wounded in body, mind, or spirit, whether their wounds are visible to others or not. Grant patience and wisdom to those around them who may not understand what they are experiencing at times or how to help them. Make us mindful of the cost they have paid for the freedoms we possess. Bless our veterans and those serving now with courage, hope, and strength. Be their power and protector, their guide, and their healing balm. In your holy name, we offer this prayer today. Amen.
Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning. And now for the flag raising and volley from VFW Post 2006 Color Guard and the Vietnam Veterans Post 52.
Detail, post the colors. Present, mark. Yep. Present, mark. Yeah, I think it will. Work, arm. Right, right. And then. Aim. Hop. Aim. Hop. Aim. Hop. Work, arm. Half up. Wait. Breathe in. Arm.
And now Darcy Schoenfeld White and Luca White will perform the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the
And now Sandy Porter will do the moment of silence and Pledge of Allegiance.
Forward, march.
Now we do the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with liberty and freedom for all.
Before we head inside, I would like to thank the MASH Brass Ensemble for coming today under the direction of Armand Walter. When we head inside, if you would all silence your phones because we are going to do the Missing Man ceremony, and directly following the Missing Man, we'll have continental breakfast. But please silence your phone during that presentation. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. We are going to give honor to the Missing Man ceremony. Please, again, make sure your phones are silenced during this presentation. When they are finished, we will have our continental breakfast.
The veterans of the Vietnam War, Post 52, would like to present to you this morning the Missing Man ceremony to honor our prisoners of war and missing in action. Is it on? No?
I'm not sure if it's on or not.
Okay.
It's just, it's on, maybe just
It's on.
a little.
Okay. The Missing Man ceremony. Please direct your attention to the table placed in front of the gazebo or the room. It is a physical symbol of the thousands of American POWs and MIAs still unaccounted for from all our foreign conflicts. We would ask that you reflect in silent prayer for those warriors who have yet to find their way home. Now I'd like to explain the symbolism of this ceremony as the veterans of the Vietnam War Post 52 Honor Guard places the items upon the table. Those who have served and those who are currently serving in the uniformed services of the United States of America will ever mindful that the sweetness of enduring peace has always been tainted by the bitterness of personal sacrifice. We are compelled to never forget that while we enjoy our daily pleasures, there are others who have endured and may still be enduring the agonies of pain, deprivation, and imprisonment. A reminder for all of us to spare no effort to secure the release of any American prisoners from captivity, the reparation of the remains of those who have died bravely in defense of our liberty, and demand a full counting of those missing in action. We call them comrades. They are unable to be with their loved ones and families, so we join together to pay humble tribute to them and to bear witness to their continued absence. The table is small, symbolizing the helplessness of one prisoner against his or her oppressors. The tablecloth is white, symbolic of the purity of their intentions to respond to their country's call to arms. Our comrades are missing from the United States Army. Our comrades are missing from the United States Navy. Our comrades are missing from the United States Air Force. Our comrades are missing from the United States Marine Corps. Our comrades are missing from the United States Coast Guard. The single rose in the vase signifies the blood they may have shed in the sacrifice to ensure the freedom of our beloved United States of America. This rose also reminds us of the family and friends of our missing comrades who keep faith while waiting their return. The red ribbon on the vase represents the red ribbons worn on the lapels of thousands who demand, with unyielding determination, a proper accounting of our comrades who are not among us. The slice of lemon on a plate reminds us of their bitter fate. The salt sprinkled on the plate reminds us of the countless fallen tears of families as they wait. The glass is inverted. They cannot toast with us at this time. The Bible is placed prominently on the table. The Bible represents the strength gained through faith to sustain those lost from our country. The United States was founded as one nation under God. The chair is empty. They are not here. The candle is reminiscent of the light of hope that lives in our hearts to illuminate their way home, away from their captors to open arms of a grateful nation. The American flag reminds us that many of them may never return and have paid the supreme sacrifice to ensure our freedom. Let us pray to the Supreme Commander that all of our comrades will soon be back within our ranks. Let us remember and never forget their sacrifices. May God watch over them and protect them and their families, and may each of us live worthy of their sacrifices in their way that we love and serve. And salute.
So it's my pleasure to introduce Lenny McKernan. Lenny is the son of a veteran, and he told me he comes from a long line of veterans. He is a 20-plus year member of the Sons of American Legion, and he is a long-time amateur historian, and he's going to talk to us today about those that were left behind. One more quick reminder, please make sure your phones are silenced during the presentation. Thank you so much. Lenny?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. First, I do want to reiterate what everybody else has said today. I would like to thank all the veterans that are in attendance here. You deserve all the praise and all the thanks and gratitude you can get. When I grew up, all my heroes were veterans, and I'll explain that a little bit better, but my dad was the top of the list. We had 8 children in my grandfather's family, 5 boys, 3 girls. During World War II, all 5 boys and the husbands of all 3 girls were in uniform at the same time. They were scattered from North Africa to Sicily to Italy to the Philippines to Okinawa. I had an uncle who was a tank commander in the South Pacific, and I always tried to wrap my head around how anybody could run a tank on the islands in the South Pacific, but they did it. And that's the beginning of my story. My ancestors go back, as far as soldiers are concerned, to my great-great-uncle, Michael O'Reilly, who fought with the 5th Pennsylvania Cavalry during the Civil War. He was in the service from 1862 to 1865, and actually was released a month before his unit helped run down the Confederates at Antietam. So he missed the surrender, but he served in the 5th Pennsylvania Cavalry for the 3-year period that he was in the service. In the Army of the James, they were located in Virginia. My Uncle Charlie, great Uncle Charlie, my grandfather's brother, was in the expeditionary service or forces that went to Europe during World War I. And he fought in the trenches, a horrible war that was, trench warfare with gas masks and machine guns, and they weren't far apart when they were fighting, and it went back and forth and back and forth. And the war ended not with a surrender, but with an armistice. The armistice was on behalf of the Germans, that they wanted to stop fighting. Didn't want to surrender, obviously, but they did work out an armistice with our president, Woodrow Wilson at the time, and the leaders of the other countries, Britain, Canada, Australia, a number of countries that were in combat with them during World War I. And they, when the war ended, Woodrow Wilson declared November the 11th, the day of the armistice was signed, as Armistice Day, and it was designated as a holiday in the United States. Moving forward into World War II, as I mentioned, my family had a number. I had 5, 6 uncles that were in service, and I had my aunts, 3 aunts, 4 aunts that provided husbands that were in the service during World War II. When World War II ended, our president at the time it ended was Harry Truman. Harry Truman changed Armistice Day to Veterans Day to honor all of our veterans, not just the armistice that was signed at the end of World War I, but all the veterans that had served our country in all the wars that we had ever had. So Veterans Day came about 1948 or 49, I'm not sure the exact year, but it was the year that Harry Truman declared it a holiday and Congress approved it. So it's been a holiday for us ever since. The interesting thing is when those veterans came home from World War I and when those veterans came home from World War II, they were honored. There were ticker tape parades. They came home as conquering heroes. And it was a wonderful thing for our country to see everybody pull together and recognize the sacrifice and the dedication that those individuals had furnished to the country and saved our freedoms. Not so much during the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Iraqi War. When our soldiers came home, there were no ticker tape parades. They came home to reunions within their families that were probably very, very emotional. And it was just a different era. The wars were different. And it became, and that's really who we have left. There are maybe a couple of World War II veterans left, but the Legion Post I belong to, we lost our last Korean War veteran about 3 weeks ago, and he was 96 years old. He was a captain in Germany at the time the Korean War broke out. So the World War II veterans, we lost the last 2 of those a year ago, and they were in their upper 90s. So we don't have a lot of World War II veterans left in this country. There are some, but in the clubs, very few. And the World War I, obviously, we lost those a long time ago. So it's interesting to see the dynamics within the American Legion in the fact that right now all the officers in my post are Vietnam veterans, and we have some, maybe a couple that fought in the Iraqi War, but most of the young veterans that were in the service following the Vietnam War, when it went to a voluntary service, most of those individuals don't seem to have a lot of interest in the organizations, the social part of their service. We do have a few, and every once in a while, I mentioned, one will show up and say, I want to join the club, and we'll take them, because we want, and the Sons chapter is probably bigger than the active chapter right now. So it's interesting to how it's worked out. But that's the way it seems to be. But the purpose of my discussion today is to talk about all those veterans that never got a chance to come home, even to the World War I, World War II veterans. They didn't get the ticker tape parade. They ended up somewhere in Europe or other countries at the time, North Africa, for example. But they ended up being laid to rest in American military cemetery somewhere in the world. And the Battle and Monuments Commission of the United States is responsible for maintaining those cemeteries with some help. All of my relatives, with the exception of one, came home from World War II. All my uncles on that side of my family, my dad's side of the family. My mother's brother, Bill, my uncle Bill, did not come home after World War II. He was killed on June 17th, 1944, as he was fighting through the hedgerows in France. He came ashore the day after D-Day as they were pushing eastward, pushing the Germans back from the coast. World War I there's a good story to be told about the cemeteries in World War I. There's about 8 of them scattered around Europe, but there is a famous one. A doctor by the name of John McCrae, a Canadian doctor by the name of John McCrae, was working diligently in long hours trying to save lives of soldiers, both British American, Australian, Canadians, who were critically injured in a battle near Flanders, Belgium. And he worked nonstop for weeks and weeks. There was a battlefield right near there where they had the ground all churned up from the attacks that had been taking place with the artillery, and they fought there. As he worked to save lives, he sat down one day and he wrote a poem. And the poem is called "In Flanders Field." It became very famous. You can pull it up it's a very short poem, but it was designed, or it was written in honor of those gentlemen that were buried near Flanders, in Flanders Field. And he was very much with those individuals. He said the poem was about the perseverance of the people that were still alive in carrying on the mission of the people that were buried in Flanders Field. A year or so after Flanders Field, the cemetery, was created, all of a sudden, red poppies started to grow in Flanders Field. And that's when he wrote the poem about the poppies. And the last line of the poem says, "Flanders Field where the poppies grow." Prior to that battle, there were no poppies in Flanders Field. So that's a very interesting thing about unexplainable happenings, I guess, is what we would call it. But he in fact did write a poem that was very famous. 372 American soldiers are buried in Flanders Field. And they're scattered amongst other cemeteries in Germany or in France, Belgium, Germany, wherever their American cemetery exists. That brings us to World War II, and the most famous cemetery in World War II is Colleville-sur-Mer. It's on the bluffs above Normandy, right above Utah Beach, where American soldiers came, Omaha Beach, where American soldiers came ashore. There are somewhere in the neighborhood, I have the numbers here. Take my glasses off to read. 9,399 American soldiers are buried in that American cemetery. It encompasses 170 acres. I have a picture of it here because my Uncle Bill, William Hawk, is buried in that cemetery. He was with the 29th Infantry Division, the 175th Regiment of the 29th Infantry Division. He's buried in Plot G, row 11, grave 6. I found that out. Now, I've not been there yet, but I really would like to go and see that grave. About 10 years ago, a lady contacted me through the internet and said she wanted to see if she could get some information about a William Hawk. She found me because my mother's name was Hawk, and she was doing some research. And she said that her mother had been assigned to take care of that grave. There are volunteers in France that give their time to making sure the cemetery is maintained. Even though it's a responsibility of the Battle and Monuments Commission of the United States, they use volunteers for a great deal to maintain the graves. And she contacted me because her mother had been taking care of my uncle's grave since 1944 when he was buried there. And she just wanted some information about him. So I was able to give her his story as much as I knew, because I was born in 1949. So I didn't know him personally, but I know him by my mother talking about him. and by the information that I was able to gather from the military, I had the notice that my grandparents got, my mother's parents got when he was killed, and asking how they wanted his body taken care of. What was the disposition they wanted to do? And one of the choices, there were cemeteries, military cemeteries all across the United States where they could have opted to have him buried back here somewhere, but there was none in Pennsylvania. And that was a different age. People didn't travel like they do today. So they knew that they would not probably visit his grave very often if it wasn't close by. And it was their wish to have him buried in this big American cemetery in France. And that's where he was buried. So I know where he is. I just have never been there to visit him. But we do have a marker at the cemetery up in near Mount Alton up in McKean County, where my grandparents are buried. There's a stone that's behind their grave, and I make sure the flag's on it every year. That's there. Nobody misses it. They put the flag on every year, but I just always go by to make sure that it's being taken care of. So when I say 3,300 or 9,399 service members, to make it 9,400, it's him. So watching over the cemetery in France is a bronze statue, and it's called the Spirit of American Youth Rising from the Waves, because the bluffs, they're here, the ocean's here, the cemetery's in the back. And they have this big 22-foot statue of American youth rising from the waves to mark the cemetery. There are 38 sets of brothers buried there, side by side. To me, that's a sad situation when you think about it. They didn't, when the draft occurred, or they volunteered. They could have enlisted, but 38 sets of brothers buried there at the cemetery in France. And there's a wall where there are 1,500 names inscribed of the missing, unknown. And that's the biggest American cemetery. The one I have also done a lot of research on, because my dad fought through North Africa, is near the old Roman city of Carthage. There's a cemetery, an American cemetery, and there are over 2,841 white bone markers in the American cemetery near Carthage, Tunisia. And those are all American soldiers who died fighting their way across from North Africa before they went on into Sicily and Italy. But some of those casualties came back to that big cemetery too. It's 27 acres of ground, 2-foot-high markers, and they're in perfect rank, straight as an arrow. And their only information on each stone is the man's name and the day he died, the date of his death. The country of Tunisia has a policy that's all that's allowed to be on a gravestone of a foreigner that's buried in the country. In other words, when they made the cemetery, they could put the name and they could put the date of death, but no birth date, nothing else, no writing on the stones. The cemetery in France has white crosses. They're marble stone white crosses. And I have a picture of those here. Anybody wants a copy of that, you can get the significance of the size of that cemetery. But at North Africa, there are 240 stones marked as unknown. These were American soldiers that either were not able to be identified, probably because they couldn't recognize them. And there's also, the words are inscribed in that, and it comes to mind with what I heard earlier from these veterans over here. Here rests in honored glory a comrade in arms known only to God. And they call this, what I read said it was 13 of the saddest words in our English language. But that's 240 individuals there. And then there's also a limestone wall containing names of another 3,724 missing in action. Nobody knows where they are. They're not buried there. They don't know where they are. And that's an inscription on those says, "Into thy hand, O Lord." In other words, that's it. Nobody knows where they are. They're in God's hands now. So. As I mentioned, there are a number of American cemeteries spread throughout the world, and in this country we have a lot of cemeteries too, where veterans are buried. After we got probably a little bit callous during the Vietnam War, towards the end, bodies were coming in every day at Dover Air Force Base in Washington. They weren't being buried over in Vietnam. They were being buried in this country. Some in Arlington, most of them probably went home to be buried in the graves on their family plots. But at the same time, it's sad to think that they'd come home every day. You could turn the news on and see them unloading caskets. And towards the end of the war, they wouldn't even show you they were coming in and unloading caskets. I had 3 classmates in high school that were killed over in Vietnam. I had 3 cousins that served in Vietnam. One won the Bronze Star. And he's actually the commander of our Legion post now. He's 78 years old, so he's got me by 3 years. So anyway, but he's still very active and does. He's very, very dedicated to that Legion post and to the armed forces. So again, thank you, all you veterans. Thanks the families of all you veterans for the support you have given them. One veteran obviously has to have support. They have to have support. They have to know a reason for fighting. My grandparents had 5 boys. They all came home. My dad ended up with a Purple Heart. He was wounded in Cisterna in Italy. He fought across from North Africa, Algeria, Tunisia, and then he was in the invasion of Sicily, and he was in the invasion of Italy, and ended up being wounded in Italy, and that was the end of his service. He came back and trained paratroopers in Alabama until he was discharged. But he fought in an organization called Darby's Rangers. They called themselves the Spearheaders. There was a book written about them. There was a movie made about them. And he was in the 1st and the 4th division of Darby's Rangers. So their first combat was in Africa. Actually, they had a couple that went with the British commandos to try an invasion in Europe that failed miserably prior to the North African invasion. But North Africa was where our combat troops got their first introduction to combat in Europe, because prior to that, they were being trained. And they were the first group that were at the level that they thought they could put them in. And our President, Franklin Roosevelt, wanted to get American soldiers into combat because he knew they were going to need that experience to help train the soldiers coming behind. So, and that's really all I've got to say today. If there's anybody has any questions for me, I'd be glad to answer them. I do have, I wrote the story of my grandparents and my family. I'm going to leave a couple copies to be donated to the library here at the aging office, and if anybody is interested and wants to read them, they can pick up and go down there at the library and read it. So, thank you.
And so it's my pleasure to introduce our second speaker, John Seitz. John was drafted into the Army and served from 1972 and 1973 out of Fort Hood, Texas. He is a Civil War and French and Indian War reenactor, and he currently is the president of the French Creek Archaeological Society. And so he's going to talk to us today about the First World War. And remember that we will be having lunch here in this room at 11:15. So, thank you. Thanks, John.
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be speaking to such wonderful veterans and their families. This morning I just was listening to the news, and they mentioned something very interesting, which I liked, and that was that it's interesting that the smallest percentage of Americans have served in the armed forces. And the way the guy put it was, if you think of Greece and the town of Sparta, they didn't have a wall around their city. Their wall was their warriors, their soldiers. And so in reality, when you think of America, our soldiers are the wall that keeps America the way it is. And so it is you that makes America great. So thank you for your service. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the First World War, which was technically the French and Indian War. When you understand the countries that were involved, the casualties, it's understanding, you understand why. But I'm going to add a few things in, because one of the sad things about our nation today is that we're losing our history. If you think about it, for the last 150 years, there's been a conscious effort to remove certain things, and basically started in the 1870s, and the goal of that organization, which still goes on today, is to remove God from all places in the public view and also from our schools. And one of the reasons why is, if you think of it this way, on the battlefield, who would the British fear most? George Washington or the local pastor with a musket? It was the local pastor with the musket, because the pastor brought hope and faith. And that's what the Army needed sometimes in those situations. And so I'm going to start with some dates, because it's interesting when you study history from I'm going to say, a godly viewpoint. It's amazing what has occurred. And if it wasn't for the French and Indian War, there would not be America, I think, because when you understand everything that was going on. So to begin with, for example, I hate reenacting glasses. 1587, Roanoke, Virginia was formed. 1608, Jamestown, Virginia. 1620, the Pilgrims came. 1630, the Puritans came. And don't believe all the stereotypes that you hear about those people. We are basically America because of those two groups. Sad thing is, with any group, second, third generation, you forget why you're here. And that's one of the problems that occurred. 1675 to 1676 was the King's Philip's War. And one of the interesting things there, it was not, on the colonist side were local Native American tribes, but also Christian Indians. And through them, New England learned how to fight guerrilla warfare. And so that stayed with them, and that's why the British, when they were occupying the cities during the Revolutionary War, could not go out into the countryside because they took such heavy casualties from guerrilla fighters. 1681, Pennsylvania was formed, and in 1700, the population of Europeans in our country was 250,000. And 1754 to 1763 was the French and Indian War. I will add in somewhere between 1730, 1740 through 1750 was what they call the First Great Awakening. And that was a religious movement through our country. And when you understand what was going on, because there was a Second Great Awakening later, God was preparing our nation not only to be formed, but also for war. And so God shows up when America usually needs it most. 1763 was Pontiac's War. That was mostly fought out in western Pennsylvania through the PA forts. But just to give you an idea, if you ever get the chance to see the books, Frontier Forts of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania had basically roughly 220 forts. But a large percentage of them were what they call places of refuge, which may have been a farmhouse that was made out of stone, so it was a little harder to burn down. And so that's another interesting study. Now, one of the things I found interesting is 1764 was the Sugar Act, and that's so Britain could let's say, pay for the French and Indian War. And then the 1765 was the Stamp Act to also pay for expenses. And one of the interesting things we're not taught in school is the Declaration of Independence. When it came out, we're always taught the main reason was taxation without representation. No. It was mostly rights. And where does taxation fall? It's number 17. And even though it was important to the colonists, it wasn't that important. But when you understand, we'll say politicians, to justify things, you have to use economics. And so taxes were pushed to the top. Where the colonies back then, it wasn't that important. My other one, which my Seneca friend always refers me to, is the very last one of the numbers in the 27th grievance was, he has excited the domestic insurrection among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages who were known to rule of warfare is an indistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Sadly, both sides committed atrocities. So here we're blaming one group of people when it's really both groups of people. (1775, 1783), the Revolutionary War, and in 1770, the population of North America of Europeans was 2.1 million. 1782, the Indians attacked Pennsylvania again and were defeated. And in 1789, all land in Pennsylvania has been ceded to the state. There's no more Indian claims. But in 1796, 3 parcels were given to Seneca Chief Corn Planter, but that disappeared in 1964 with the building of the Kinzua Dam, which was technically a disgrace for our nation. But Johnny Cash has a wonderful song concerning that situation, and it was to benefit the Native Americans. Now, the French and Indian War was fought between 1754 and 1763, but in Europe it's called the 7 Years' War. When we did an event in Concorton one time, a French family actually came by, and I was talking with them. They said they'll teach the 7 Years' War in France, but they do not talk about the French and Indian War. And I think it's like this reason. A friend of mine just was able to get his last copy of a volume of books written by the Confederacy on the Civil War. And the interesting thing is when the Confederates write about the Battle of Gettysburg, they call it a skirmish. So it's probably because they lost. Participants with the French was the Holy Roman Empire, Russia, Spain, Sweden, Saxony, and the Mongol Empire, the Algonquin Indians, and some of the Native Americans that would have been west of the Ohio River, mostly in the Illinois country. On the British side was Prussia, certain parts of Germany, Portugal, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which might have included the Lenape or Delawares and the Shawnee. Just a little note, I probably will use Iroquois once in a while. The term is actually Iroquois. It is a derogatory term, developed by the Algonquins to basically call the Seneca or the Haudenosaunee lower than the snake's belly. And so that's what that actually stands for. Now, one of the reasons for the war was Austria's attempt to win back the province of Silesia, which had been taken by Prussia. Antagonism between Prussia, allied to Britain, and Austria, allied to France. Commercial and imperial rivalry between Britain and France, but also overseas colonial struggles between Britain and France for control of North America and India. Now I'm going to add this a little bit, just to give you an idea when it comes to economics. We call it the French and Indian War, but it's also a time of the fur trade. Now this is from 1837. There was a demand for 5 million felt beaver hats in Europe. At $2 a beaver pelt, that's a minimum of $10 million back then. Today, that is $340 million in 1837, but think what it would have been like in the 1700s. That is a wonderful, not a wonderful reason why there was rivalry between France and Britain, because that fur trade was immense, more than people will ever think. To give you an idea, everything is based on one prime beaver pelt, and later on it's one, or I should say one buck beaver, or one buck deer, and that's where we get our term for our dollar bill, the buck. So one beaver would get you 1.5 pounds of gunpowder, a gallon of brandy, 20 gun flints, 2 hatchets, 4 would get you a pistol, and 11 would get you a musket. But there had to be equivalents too, so people could make money. So 1 otter would equal a beaver, 8 mink would equal a beaver, 5 pounds of feathers would, or 4 raccoons. Interesting, 2 woodchucks. And the reason why is a woodchuck skin makes wonderful pouches. I never knew that. So, which I don't have a groundhog, now I gotta get one. Or a half of a moose hide. So the value, it just blew my mind when I realized how much beavers were going for it, when you think the number they were getting. Now, does anybody know what saved the beaver from extinction? Silk hats. So that's the only thing that saved the beaver. Now, early on, the French may not have been after territory, but that kind of really changed. They looked at the Native Americans as trading partners. And the interesting thing is, a lot of them would live with the tribes and marry into the tribes. So they were more in tune to the Native Americans, far less than the British were. And as we know, with the British, after territory, the sun never sets on the British Empire. And so that was their main goal. Now, most of the battles were fought in North America, Europe, India, the Caribbean, and the Philippines. And kind of what makes it the First World War is if you think of the casualties. Here in America, French and Indian allies, 3,000. British and Indian allies, 10,400. European theater, 868,000 to 1.4 million. They'll never get an exact total. So it was a major war fought basically everywhere. At that time in North America, the French had 70,000 Europeans here. The British had 1.2 million here. Estimate of Native Americans, basically along the East Coast, coming inland a little bit, about 175,000. Now, some of the problems. British had far more ports. They had basically 13 colonies. So they had major ports everywhere. They can get in supplies, troops, whatever. French did not. They had they actually had 3 colonies. In Canada, which was along the St. Lawrence, the Illinois country, which would have been Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, and New Orleans. So the St. Lawrence freezes, and so they can't get troops in, or they can't get supplies in. But that leads us to another story that a lot of people don't really realize. From 1300 AD through 1850, there's what we call the Little Ice Age going on. I'll get to another story about George Washington when he traveled out this way. But if you think of the St. Lawrence freezing, that's a major river, and it flows, and it's freezing. If you think of Valley Forge, that was during the George Washington. That was during the Little Ice Age, and I used to live in the eastern part of the state. I don't ever remember seeing major ice chunks coming down the Delaware River where he would have had issues. And so the Little Ice Age was playing a factor, and I think it's one of the reasons why we are a nation today. I think it helped. But if you are godly minded, you'll see God's hand at work when it comes to our history. Now, another little thing I'll add, the Ohio River, I didn't bring the Indian names because I can't even come close to pronouncing them, but it was translated Beautiful River. Now, in the 1700s, and I almost guarantee if you could see in the past down here along French Creek, I'll guarantee you're probably going to find bodies buried there. So many people died coming out this way that eventually the entire Ohio River system and the valley then was, basically the name was translated back as the Bloody River Valley because of all the casualties that were taken out this way, and mostly by civilians. Now, religion did play a major role. Each side had their own missionaries. Now, the Jesuits came with the French, and so the Jesuits were very active. Some good, some horrible. The best way I can put it, the church has a lot of apologizing to do when it comes to Native Americans, that I will say. But there are some neat things that were going on. Jesuit Father Marquette started his work with the Indians in the Illinois area around 1666. On June 17, 1673, they were wonderful explorers too. He discovered the Mississippi River. Now during his travels, his health failed and he died at the age of 39. And so the Indians brought his body to Lake Michigan. They buried it along the lakeshore. 2 years later, they dug him up, took him back to Mackinac Mission there, but in a monstrous, I'll call it a canoe caravan. They really honored him by bringing him back, and it was probably impressive to see all these canoes bringing this one body back. There's also, in 1745, David Bernard, after preaching to Native Americans in December, wrote about the response. They soon came in one after another with tears in their eyes to know what they should do to be saved. It was an amazing season of power among them, and it seemed as if God had bowed the heavens and come down, and that God was about to convert the whole world. Plus, in 1759, there's actually a Native American named, probably get his name wrong here, Samson Occam. He was a direct descendant of one of the famous war chiefs, but he was ordained by the Presbyterians, and he became the first American Indian to publish works in English, and these included sermons, hymns, and a short autobiography. Now, there are some other interesting stories out there. One Jesuit wrote that the Native Americans were coming in and really requesting rosaries, and they thought they were doing wonderful and getting God across to them. So he did ask one of the chiefs, why all these rosaries? And the chief just simply said, free beads. And what they were doing was taking them apart to make things out of them. And the other one was, have you ever seen the Lorraine cross? It's got the main branch of the cross. It's got two bars coming across the top. They were handing out lots of those. And it took a while before the Jesuits translated what the Native Americans were calling them. And it turned out it was a symbol to them as a dragonfly. And so what they wanted them for was decorations. And so there are some really nice stories out there. Now, I think we have to understand, too, the Native Americans were a Stone Age culture then. But the Europeans coming would change that overnight because they went from Stone Age to Iron Age almost immediately. And that was their Achilles heel because basically they were still living off the land. And a lot of times, if you understand, there's a planting season, then there's a harvest season because you have to get ready for the wintertime. When's the best time to attack an Indian village? In the winter, because if you destroy all their crops, everything they have stored, then you defeated that entire nation or at least a village, and that's one of the problems. So they did, even though European goods made it easier for them, they became dependent on them. And with trading and furs and bribes and alcohol, basically did spell their doom as a nation. One of the other things that's kind of brought up during this time period is, I'm going to get into scalping, but real quick. Native Americans have always done it, but it was extremely, extremely rare. And there's probably reasons for it, ceremonially or whatever. But just for Pennsylvania alone, 1756, Lieutenant Governor Robert Morris put out an order that all males over the age of 12, they would give 130 pieces of 8 for every scalp. And almost every colony did that back then. But what had happened was, who'd you say, there was those that took advantage of it, and they killed everybody. And some of them were so bad, they even killed Europeans too, that they had the right color hair. Now in eastern Pennsylvania, we had basically the Delaware or the Lenape. Around 1600, and this is when you understand the value of the furs and what Native Americans could get for them, they started going after each other. In 1660, the Iroquois attacked the Lenape, and they started moving westward. And so, for example, Custologa Town, that was a Delaware or Lenape village. The Treaty of Easton in 1758 continues the movement along with the Shawnees. So now the Shawnees are being moved westward. And actually, the Haudenosaunee used them as their, to guard their western border, which basically would have been the Ohio River. Now, the Susquehanna River Valley to the Chesapeake was controlled by the Susquehannock, and they were receiving arms from the Swedish traders around 1651. Now, the Susquehannock were attacked by the Mohawks, Senecas, and the Cayugas, but were defeated because, again, trying to get control of the fur trade. Now, in 1661, the Susquehannock are in decline, smallpox. Now, just to add, in the early 1600s, almost the entire east coast of New England, 75% of all Native Americans were wiped out basically from disease. And so when you understand that when the Pilgrims landed, there was nobody there. But they found a village with corn to be planted, and the fields had already been tilled 2 years before, and 2 Native Americans showed up, and Squanto, which we know, basically saved the Pilgrims' lives with everything that he showed them. And if you read that story, that's an act of God. Now, the Iroquois, or I should say the Hautestonis, tried again, and they killed a large number of Susquehannock, and by 1675, there were only 300 warriors left. By the time the Revolutionary War started, as far as we know, there are no Susquehannock left today. They were probably wiped out shortly after the Revolutionary War. But this opened the way for colonists to go westward now, because the Susquehanna River now is open. In 1682, France claims Louisiana. In 1744 to 1745, in Europe, there's King George's War, and this is where territory is being taken. This is what leads us now to the French and Indian War. So, get all the parties in play, and I'm probably going to butcher some of these names because they are in French. In 1749, Celeron leads a party to bury lead plates and attach copper plates to trees claiming the Ohio Valley for France. Now, all the copper plates the Indians took because they're wonderful things to make decorations out of. We know there were 6 plates. We think one of the records says the Indians took one of them, so we don't know if they took it before it was buried. So they found 2, and so there's still 3 out there somewhere, as far as I know. But the plate reads, in the year 1749, the reign of Louis XV, King of France, we, Celeron, commander of a detachment sent by Monsieur the Marquis de la Glacière, Governor General of New France, to establish tranquility in some Indian villages along these cantons, have buried this lead plate at the confluence of the Ohio and the Chautauqua River, this 29th day of July near the River Ohio, otherwise Belle Riviere, as a monument of renewal of the processions we have taken of the said river, Ohio, and all those that empty into it, and of all the lands on both sides as far as the source of said rivers, which was a lot of territory. As enjoyed or ought to have been enjoyed by the kings of France preceding, and as those who have maintained themselves by arms and treaties, especially those of Ryswick, Urwick, and Alexlau Chaparral. And so that's what the lead plate said. Also in 1749, Virginia sets up a land grant of 200 acres around what is now Pittsburgh. And the Ohio Company has 7 years to bring in 7 families and build a fort. Back then, Virginia basically claimed all of western Pennsylvania. Somewhere along the line, Connecticut comes in too and claims something up that way. But in 1752, the French in Quebec learned that the British are up to no good. And so they set out and they destroyed the British trading post at a Miami village in Pickawillany, and that's in Ohio. So the French start coming in now into our area. Now they're starting to build forts. The first 3 forts were built at the same time, 1753. 600 men came in and they built Fort Presque Isle, which is now Erie, Fort LeBoeuf, which is Waterford, and Fort Marchant, which is Franklin. In 1754, they basically take over Fort Duquesne. It's partially finished, so they eventually had to finish it. Now, in October 13th, 1753, George Dinwiddie of Virginia sends 21-year-old George Washington along with a party of 6 and arrives at Fort LeBoeuf on December 11th to tell the French to leave or expect reprisals. Now, the French are polite and firm, and they say no. Now, on the way back, this is where I remember the mini ice age. is God's hand upon George Washington. On December 20, oh, no, we'll tell this. It took 95 days for George Washington to travel from Williamsburg, Virginia, to Fort LaBeouf and back again, and it was well over 1,000 miles. And think of a 21-year-old doing that back then. Amazing feat. So December 29, 1753, George Washington Gist reached the Allegheny River, and it is full of ice chunks. They build a raft of logs, and then they try to maneuver the craft into the icy water. The raft hits a ice jam, and George is thrown into the river. Near hypothermic, Washington pulls himself back with the aid of Gist back on the raft. Struggling against the ice and water and numbness, they were too exhausted. They could not make the other shore, so they get off their raft and they walk to the island in the middle of the river and spend a miserable night. In the morning when they wake up, the Allegheny River is frozen solid. And they get up and walk across the river and head back to Virginia. So, act of God? Who knows? Washington returns to Williamsburg on January 16, 1754. He does mention that wonderful spot in Pittsburgh for a fort, and that's why the Ohio Company sent people there. Now, on April 4th, 1754, Washington leaves for the frontier with 165 men. The main job is to protect the Virginians who are building the fort. The governor's orders are this: any attempts are made to obstruct the works or interrupt our settlements by any persons whatsoever, you are to restrain all such offenders, and in case of resistance, make prisoners of or kill and destroy them. So he had his orders. April 4th, Washington learns that the French have already taken the fort and renamed it. And so on April 23rd, Washington calls a council of war. And in the morning of, well, there's actually two battles that go on during this time period. Jumonville Glen and the Battle of the Great Meadows, or Fort Necessity. But on May 28th, 1754, the French and British meet. Their first shot was fired, and that's what set the world on fire. That was the unofficial beginning of the French and Indian War, that one shot. And so eventually it led to the Battle of the Great Meadows. 11 French were killed and taken prisoner, and French ensign Joseph Jumonville was killed by Seneca Chief Half-King. British, 1 killed, 3 wounded. So again, unofficial beginning of the French and Indian War. Now, instead of heading back to Virginia, George decides to build Fort Necessity. He did have Native Americans with him, and he basically told George, you know, you're dumb to build a fort right here. Because what did he do? He picked the lowest spot he could find, and when it rained, it became a bog. And when the French came in, they took the high ground. George left it there for them. But so the Native Americans were not going to be with him, so they left. So the rain comes and the land becomes a bog. On June 10th, 200 men of the Virginia Regiment show up with 9 small cannons, but for some reason they did not bring any rations with them, so they did not have any food. On July 3rd, the French show up with 600 men and 100 Indians, under the command of Captain Louis Valor, which is Jumonville's brother. So George Washington and his men killed his brother. I'm surprised he let them go. So it rained so hard, everybody knows the term, try to keep your powder dry. It rained so bad that they could not use their muskets, they could not use their cannon. And so they surrendered. And so George Washington promised not to build any forts in the Ohio Valley, and also maybe admitting to assassinating Jumonville, because the document he signed was in French. Nobody could read French, so he has no idea what he signed. So July 4th, 1754, Washington and his men head back to Virginia. A second time, his mission failed. Interesting thing is, sometimes what makes a great general? Failure, yes. And so, even during the Revolutionary War, he had failures, but I think every single time he did learn. And I think God had a place in that too, because learning is a great teacher like that. Now, the same year, what I found was interesting, the colonists called for a intercontinental congress with representatives coming in from all 13 colonies, and they meet in Albany, New York. What they wanted was protection from the French and to form a colonial militia and to pay for it by a self-imposed tax. And Benjamin Franklin was the organizer of this. 6 of the colonies could not make it, and so nothing was accomplished. But they did set a unifying goal. And so the groundwork for the Republic had been laid. And so what would have happened if the French weren't being as intrusive as they were? The interesting thing is, it starts leading the colonists toward, whether they know it or not, it's leading them toward revolution. In February 1755, General Braddock arrives with British troops. And on May 29th, Braddock left with George Washington, 2,100 men, cannon and wagons. And after crossing Monongahela, they were basically seven miles from, let's just say, Pittsburgh. Now, on June 9th, Braddock splits his force. He sends 1,400, what they call the flying column forward, rushing ahead, but they leave the wagons and some of the troops behind to protect them. The French learn that the British are coming, and so they start out with 200 French and 500 Indians. Basically, the British outnumbered them 2-1. They went to sit in ambush. But Lieutenant Thomas Gage runs into the French, and so the Battle of Monongahela begins, and this raged on for 3 hours. Now, the Indians were smart, because back then, a lot of times when the armies met in the open fields, you did not touch the officers, or really the drummer boys or the musicians, because the British liked, or most European armies liked, no chaos on the battlefield. And so we understand musket fire too. Put it this way, I think General Burnside mentioned that of the Civil War, the average soldier could not hit the broadside of the barn at 100 yards, and he's talking about the big barn doors. And so 100 men shooting at 100 men at that distance, you were lucky maybe to hit 10 or 15 people. And if you ever watched the movie Patriot, when the reenactors get together, that is highly accurate on how bad they fired. And so, so this is an unusual situation for the British, because now they're in an immense forest trying to fight a battle. So the Indians took out the officers first, then went after the drummer boys. Now there's chaos. So confusion reigned. The French and Indians could fire, they said, into, if we put it today, multi-football fields of a sea of red. They could not miss. And the British soldiers never experienced this before. And again, guerrilla warfare. With all the smoke, the scalping, the screaming, and the yelling, most officers dead or wounded, the British Army panics. Now Braddock is mortally wounded. Washington is credited for saving the army from total destruction. During this battle in the retreat, French casualties, 8 killed, 4 wounded. Indian casualties, 15 killed, 12 wounded. British casualties, 456 killed, 422 wounded. It was a massacre. And that's because they did not know how to fight guerrilla warfare. Now, they did make it back to Dunbar's camp, and we think, I think it's a federal park today. I'm not sure. I know it's a park. I think it's about a mile from where Fort Necessity was, but Colonel Dunbar was in charge of the wagon train. So when the army showed up, they received all the wounded. Braddock died, and I think that's where they buried him in the road, and they took the army over to bury him. And I think they came back about 50 years later to get him. But Dunbar decided to destroy the vast majority of supplies, and it says he destroyed hundreds of tons of supplies and ordnance. He just blew them up. And today, all over that area, you'll still find stuff if you're allowed to metal detect. Interesting, George Washington writes home. But by all powerful dispensations of providence, I have been protected by all human probability and expectation. I have 4 bullet holes through my coat. And just to mention, when they were building the highway through the area, I'm not sure when, somebody did find a button off of George Washington's coat, and that was back in Mount Vernon. And 2 horses shot from underneath me, yet escaped unhurt, although death was leveling my companions on every side. There's also other letters that George Washington, or he's talking with people, he could not believe that the greatest army on earth could be defeated by such a small group. And we think God put him through this to give him the idea that the British can be defeated and thoughts of revolution. So it is an interesting time period, because he does leave the army after that, kind of, and he goes back to surveying, which I'll get to in a second. Now, about 3 years later, the British do take Pittsburgh, and it's in their hands. Now, interesting, the cannons that Braddock had, the French took them, put them on sleds, and they drug them from, we'll just say, Pittsburgh all the way to Fort Niagara on the other side of Niagara Falls. And technically, they were used to protect the front gate to Fort Niagara. Then the French started abandoning all their forts. The British didn't take Erie or LeBoeuf or Marchand. The French just burned them to keep the British from getting them. Now, if the Battle of Monongahela did not occur, the course of history would have changed. The war created past and current expenses needed to be paid. Because of the war, British started to become a problem for the colonists. Taxes, loss of rights led us to the Revolutionary War. And so, for us to be who we are, we had to have this kind of war, and I think God knew that. In 1770, George Washington comes out this way again. He's surveying one of the chiefs, and I have a question mark. He may have been Red Hawk. He was one of the chiefs that was at the battle of where Braddock was killed. So they have a council fire, and the chief says he ordered his braves to fire at Washington, but all missed. He then ordered them to stop firing at him. He said, "A power mightier than we shield him," and said, "The Great Spirit protects this man and guides his destinies. He will become the chief of nations, and a people yet unborn will hail him as a founder of a mighty empire." And the interesting thing is that used to be in history books up to 1920, and it's been taken out. Why? I think it's because the prophecy that was given by this Native American, and it kind of would lead you to believe that God has a hand in our history. And we think Red Hawk also said this: Washington was never born to be killed by a bullet. I had 17 fair fires at him with my rifle, which means point blank range. I could not bring him to the ground. So some very, very interesting stories. And are they true? Who knows? But I like them because it shows a hand of providence on George. Now, the war ended in February 10th, 1763 with the Treaty of Paris. The British received Canada from France and Florida from Spain. They did permit France to keep the West Indies Sugar Islands, but they gave Louisiana to Spain. And so with that, that is my program, and I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you very much for inviting me. It's always wonderful. It's the first time I've spoken in front of people for a long time, so thank you.
Colleen Munn, as she introduced me, I'm with PA Stitchers, your local chapter of the National Quilts of Valor Foundation. Thank you for the invitation to be a part of Through the Eyes of a Veteran program today. It is always an honor for us to be a part of this, to recognize veterans in our community. Today we will be recognizing 19 veterans that have been nominated by a family member or friend to receive their Quilt of Valor. But before we do that, I would like to take time to recognize each one of you, not personally, but as a group. We'd be here forever if it was personally. But if you would stand, if you were a veteran, I would appreciate it. Thank you all, and happy Veterans Day to you. Now, I let you sit down, but I'm going to ask you one question. This is for veterans. As you know, I've talked to most of you that have received quilts. I've talked to you to get your bios. At one point, I was talking to a veteran And he said, I asked him what the branch service he was in, and he said, there's only one. And he said, well, I thought there was 5, and then there's Space Guards was added, so it makes 6. And he says, nope, there's only one. And I said, okay, well, let me solve this. I want you guys to answer one question for me. On the count of 3, I want you to tell me what branch of the service it was, or is the only branch of the service. Okay, are you ready? 1, 2, 3. That's what I thought. Somebody did correct me and say there is only one, and it's the branch of the armed services. The one that told me that on the phone, though, was a Marine. Quilts of Valor is a national organization that was founded in 2003 by a grassroots quilter by the name of Catherine Roberts when her son was deployed to Iraq. She saw quilts as a way to bring comfort and healing to veterans battling the demons of war. Our mission is to present Quilts of Valor to servicemen and women and veterans touched by war. Since 2003, and this is a hard number for me to say it, so I'll try not to mutilate it too bad, over 400,906 Quilts of Valor have been awarded across the United States, Germany, Afghanistan, and Iraq. PA Stitchers of Valor got started in 2016 when I made and awarded my first 2 Quilts of Valor to my niece and nephew upon their retirement from the United States Navy. Shortly after, I was contacted by the National Foundation. Every one of these quilts after today will be registered with a national organization with your name, your date of service, and your rank and your rank. Sorry. And they keep track of that. So when I registered my niece and her husband's quilts, they contacted me and they said to me, we have a veteran in your area that needs to be awarded or has been nominated for a Quilt of Valor. And I said, okay, no problem. I can take care of that. Within 3 weeks' time, they contacted me 3 times, 3 different veterans, and I said, wait a minute. I was working full-time in a part-time job at the time, and so sewing was not a frequent thing. It still isn't. I don't know why. But I went to my quilt guild in Sagertown, the Free Spirit Quilt Guild, and explained the program to them, explained about the nominations that we had, and told them that I can't do this by myself, I need help. So our guild, we discussed it at the guild meeting, discussed the program, discussed the qualifications of the quilts, and went over the process of it. And we decided in 2017 we would do it as a service project for that year. After that, I did approach other Quilts of Valor groups and asked them if they would join us. I promoted it at our presentations. If anybody would like to join us, we're always looking for help. So in 2017, we joined the national organization, had our first, that was in April. In May of 2017, we awarded 11 quilts. How we got 11 quilts done in a month, I'm not sure yet, but we did. As of yesterday, as of Saturday, after Saturday's presentation, we have awarded 689 Quilts of Valor to local veterans. And if you've done your math, we're doing 19 today and 689. 700 is today. What that means is we have had the honor to award 689 veterans in this area for their time and service with the United States Armed Forces. Now I want to know if there's anyone that is good with math. Well, we already did that. Sorry. When we finish today, it'll be 707 Quilts of Valor. I have to find my spot in my notes, sorry. Notice these quilts are awarded to our veterans. They are not handed out like a book or a magazine. They are not charity quilts where we go to the store and buy them. They are all lovingly crafted by quilters within our group. And if you ladies will take your spot, these are the ladies that have made these quilts. Come on, take your spots. I may be the person up front, but these guys do a lot of the work.
And so do you.
We work in groups, frequently have sew days once a month as we get together and create the tops of the quilts. Then the quilts are given to our long arm quilters that have the long arm machines, and they do the quilting for us. They come back, and then some of these ladies do the binding, which is the edge of the quilt that seals it all together. It's a process, but it all gets done. But these ladies have a part in that, and I can't say enough about them. I keep telling them I'm going to crack the whip on them, but I don't need to. Somebody said the other day, let me show you the scars. At this time, what we're going to do is introduce the veterans. As your name is called, you're going to come up front and take a seat in one of the chair that's designated for you. The girls will hold up your quilt behind you, and we have a photographer running around here. Brian, he might come in front of you for a little bit, but he's our official photographer. So we're going to start at that end. We're going to come this way to here. We're going to go down that end and come this way. And the reason is that is so that we can see, Rich and I can see how the progress is coming. Mr. Rich Antone is going to do the introductions. He is Rockin' Rich on the radio station, and he will be doing the introductions. Also, as you come forward, would you bring a family member with you, please? Rich. Did you get your bios? What did you do with it?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rich Anton, as Colleen said, Rockin' Rich. I've been a broadcaster since 1978. I started in Clarion, Pennsylvania many moons ago. I've been here in Northwest PA, Meadville, Pennsylvania for the last 20 years, working right out of the downtown mall. So I do a classic rock morning show. It's an honor, it's a privilege to be in the room full of these veterans and their families. It's truly my honor, and I come from a long line of family members who have served, going back to World War I, 7 of them from the Second World War, and an older stepbrother who served in the Navy during the Vietnam War. So this is very personal to me as well, to see this happen. And I do want to throw a shout out to Colleen. She's talking about, you know, cracking the whip and all. There has to be a point person for something this large, of this magnitude. And she's been at it for a long time. She does a great job. So, Colleen. Let's begin. Sergeant Richard L. Burroughs. Sergeant Burroughs served in the United States Army from 1966 to 1974, active duty. In 1974 to 1991 in the Army Reserves. Took his basic training, Fort Benning, Georgia, and wheel vehicle and track mechanics training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Served in Vietnam for 6 months in Army security and had 3 other deployments to Korea, Vietnam, and Germany. Sergeant Burroughs is a member of the VFW in Reynolds. Sergeant Richard L. Burroughs, thank you for your service. Spec 4, Roland W. Turner. Specialist Turner served in the United States Army from 1967 to 1969. He took his basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, his advanced training at Fort Gordon, Georgia, for base-to-base communications. He served in Vietnam on Hill 837 for 13 months. Specialist Turner is a member of the Moose Lodge and Greenville VFW. Spec 4 Roland W. Turner, thank you for your service. Spec 4 James A. Rice. Specialist Rice served in the United States Army from 1985 to 1991. He took his basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, and served as a total mission crew member. He had an 18-month tour of Korea and 2 tours to the DMZ from 1986 to 1988, and 3 years in Germany, where he drove 5-ton cargo trucks. On Christmas Eve 1990, he was sent to Saudi Arabia to serve as a liaison officer, drove around a major. Specialist Rice works at the Erie VA Hospital in housekeeping. He's a member of the VFW and helps with Helping Hands in Cambridge Springs. He states that he joined the military to follow in his father's footsteps, who served during World War II in Korea and 2 tours to Vietnam as a Master Sergeant with the United States Marine Corps. Spec 4 James A. Rice, thank you for your service. Spec 4 Jane L. Thompson. Spec 4 Thompson served in the United States Army from 1976 to 1979. She took her basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and served as a personal action specialist. During basic training, she was one of the first group of women to train with men. While she was serving at Fort Polk, Louisiana, she met her husband, Staff Sergeant Larry D. Thompson. Spec 4 Thompson is a member of the Oakland Township VFD, Oakland Methodist Church, and has served as a scout leader. Spec 4 Jane L. Thompson, thank you for your service. Staff Sergeant Larry D. Thompson. As you figured, this is a family affair here. Staff Sergeant Thompson served with the United States Army from 1970 to 1987. He took his basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey, his advanced training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and served as combat engineer specializing in demolition. He served in Nuremberg, Germany with the 3rd Infantry Division, 82nd Engineer Brigade, and also with the 356th Quartermaster Company at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and the 588 Engineer Battalion, 3rd Infantry Division in Germany. He volunteered to go to Vietnam 3 times, but was denied each time. While serving at Fort Polk, he met his wife, Spec 4 Jane L. Thompson. Staff Sergeant Thompson has served as an EMT for the ambulance service in Franklin and a Sunday school teacher for the Oakland Methodist Church. He's also a ham radio operator, and is set up for disasters. That's good to know. Staff Sergeant Larry D. Thompson, thank you for your service. Spec 4 Richard A. Henry. Specialist Henry served with the United States Army from 1968 to 1970. He took his basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and served as an engineer equipment operator. He was deployed to Germany and didn't like it, so he volunteered to go to Vietnam, which he states was a mistake. They found a cyst on his back and sent him to Japan for treatment, but it would take too long to heal, so they sent him back to New Jersey, where they did surgery on his back. He then worked in Kansas with an ordnance company and spent most of his military career training, which helped him in his civilian life. Specialist Henry is a life member of the VFW and member of the American Legion. Spec 4, Richard A. Henry, thank you for your service. Corporal Brock W. Childs. Corporal Childs served in the United States Marine Corps from 2004 to 2011, when he medically retired. He took his basic training at Parris Island, South Carolina, infantry training at Camp Gigger, North Carolina, and trained with Israelis for 30 days for counterterrorism. He took infantry training and served with William Kyle Carpenter, a medically retired United States Marine who received the United States' highest military honor, the Medal of Honor, for his actions in Afghanistan in 2010. Corporal Childs was medically released just prior to Kyle Carpenter earning his awards. Corporal Childs works with the Warren County Veterans Council. He has helped several Marines and other veterans with suicide prevention. He's a 15 years sober from alcoholism, and he's a big football supporter for his kids. Corporal Brock W. Childs, thank you for your service. Corporal Rose M. Abbott. Corporal Abbott served in the United States Marine Corps from 1957 to 1960. She took her basic training at Parris Island, South Carolina, and advanced training at Cherry Point, Bainbridge, Maryland, and served in the administration field. She filled in for deployed soldiers at Camp Lejeune. After her service, Corporal Abbott worked at the Pentagon under President John F. Kennedy and during the Bay of Pigs. She worked for the Department of Defense for 3 years and then transferred out of that department, worked for a purchasing agent for the United States Army and Motorola. She worked in the medical field as a member of the Chamber of Commerce and has helped with Toys for Tots. Corporal Rose M. Abbott, thank you for your service. Hall Tech 3rd Class Edward G. Marin. Hall Tech Marin served in the United States Navy from 1990 to 1993. He took his basic training at Great Lakes Naval Base and served as a welder firefighter. He served during Desert Storms and was stationed at Holy Locks, Scotland, where he worked with boat ops on mid-gate boats, repairing boat engines. He was later assigned to the USS Philippine Sea, CG-58, in May of 1992, and served in the Mediterranean and Red Seas. And while deployed, the ship made 2 Suez Canal transits and boarded 39 vessels in support of the United Nations sanctions against Iraq, and earning a 2nd Southwest Asia Service Medal. Additionally, served with the United Nations operations off the coast of the former Yugoslavia, and port visits were made to Spain, France, Italy, Egypt, and Israel. Petty Officer Marin works at Bethesda and has coached hockey, Y baseball, Mercyhurst prep football, Erie Explosion Arena football for 11 years, winning 2 championships, and semi-pro football in Pittsburgh, winning 4 championships. Hall Tech 3, Edward G. Marin, thank you for your service.
I'll stand up taller. The next quilt is our 700th quilt to be awarded. It's going to a Navy veteran that's a female, because it started with a Navy veteran that was also a female. I did not pick this. John Amato picked this person to receive this quilt for her service. It doesn't mean it takes away from any of the rest of you. You're all important. As I'm talking to you veterans, I've met a lot of amazing veterans. I've heard a lot of awesome stories. Some of you, I've had to drag it out of your throat to get something out of you. And others, you're willing to give me a book. But each one of you has been, it's been wonderful to meet each one of you and an honor to award you. So, if you will continue on.
Absolutely.
Well,
Colleen.
you be the one. And I'll take the next one.
All right, the 700th quilt. Engine Man Second Class, Jeanette E. Kitch. Engine Man Second Class Kitch served the United States Navy from 1989 to 1999. She took her basic training at Great Lakes Naval Base in Great Lakes, Illinois, and served as an engine man. Seaman Kitch worked in ocean graphics, making 9 maps of the ocean floor, and was stationed outside of Dubai. She worked 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. When coming back to the States from her deployment, she went through Greece and Spain and crossed the Red Sea, where God split the Red Sea for Moses to cross into the Promised Land. She states it's very dry and still not much growing there. Seaman Kitch is a member of the Meadville VFW. She is a Sunday school teacher and works as a surgical tech in the OR room, has done that for 24 years. She's also a faithful blood donor to the community blood bank. Engine Man Second Class, Jeanette E. Kitch. Thank you for your service. Senior Airman Jackie A. Long. Airman Long served in the United States Air Force from 1980 to 1983. She took her basic training at Lackland Air Force Base, Lackland, Texas, and refrigeration and air conditioning training at Wichita Falls, Kansas, and at Grissom, Indiana. She served in refrigeration and air conditioning. She was stationed at Vandenberg Air Force Base and witnessed several missile launches as well as the landing of the Challenger space shuttle in New Mexico. Airman Long teaches Sunday school and assists with a church boys and girls program at her church. Senior Airman Jackie A. Long, thank you for your service. Airman First Class E4 Joseph Hall Kerr. Airman First Class Kerr graduated from Meadville Senior High School on June 7, 1960 at the age of 17. 1 week later, he was in basic training at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. After 8 weeks of basic training, he was assigned to Chanute Air Force Base in Illinois and attended jet engine mechanics school. On November 9, 1960, Joe was assigned to the Air Force Base in Lyon, France, just northeast of Paris. He served there for 3 years in the 66th Consolidated Aircraft Maintenance Squadron, part of the 66th Tactical Reconnaissance Wing. As a jet engine mechanic, he helped maintain RF-101 fighter jets. He returned to McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey and received a release from active duty on 6 December 1963. He received a status of separation on June 14, 1964, and an honorable discharge on June 14, 1966. Joe has always been active in his church, St. Paul's Reformed Church, Park Avenue in Meadville, a member of the VFW, Post 52, and Sagertown American Legion. Over the years, he's brought laughter, smiles, assistance to many in the community. A notable contribution has been made to the American Red Cross. And as of August of this year, he's donated 255 pints of blood. That's 31 7/8 gallon. If you're doing the math. It's almost 32 gallons. So, Airman First Class E4 Joseph Hall Kerr, thank you for your service. Senior Airman Ronald K. Lloyd. Airman Lloyd served in the United States Air Force from 2002 through 2008. Took his basic training at Lackland Air Force Base, Lackland, Texas, and his AIT training in Wichita, Kansas, and served as an aircraft electronic and environmental specialist. He reached the rank of senior airman before he finished tech school, was awarded Airman of the Year and Maintainer of the Year while at Lackland. He was an aircraft electrician for the Thunderbirds. Airman Lloyd volunteers at Soldiers and Sailors Home in Erie and is part of Adopt a Highway, Harvest Food Bank, and members of Engine House. Senior Airman Ronald K. Lloyd, thank you for your service. Airman First Class Two Stripes Lewis W. Woodward. Airman Woodward served in the United States Air Force in the 70s. He took his basic training at Lackland Air Force Base, Lackland, Texas, and advanced training in San Antonio, Texas, and in Denver, Colorado as a bomb builder. He served in the ammo dumps at Nellis Air Force Base and took 2 tours of Thailand and Southeast Asia. Airman Woodward worked as a veterans representative at the Department of Corrections in Mercer and Albion prisons and later transferred to Cambridge Springs for 25 years. Airman First Class Lewis W. Woodward, thank you for your service. Staff Sergeant Christopher G. Martin. Sergeant Martin retired from the United States Air Force in 1989 after serving for 20 years. He took his basic training at Lackland Air Force Base, Lackland, Texas, and Inventory Management School, Denver, Colorado. He took several tours to Thailand, Korea, Japan, England, Germany, and Italy. He worked in computer operations, keeping track of spare aircraft parts. On deployments, he worked in the repair facilities where they went in and built and set up portable units and helped design breakdown storage units. Sergeant Martin is a member of the VFW in Maine and served as a tutor also in Maine. Staff Sergeant Christopher G. Martin, thank you for your service. Fireman Eugene E. Shaw. Fireman Shaw served in the United States Navy from 1964 to 1968. He took his basic training at San Diego, California, fireman structure training at Norfolk, Virginia, and worked with damage control. He served at a radio station in Annapolis, Maryland, and took Mediterranean cruise visiting all ports of the destroyer ship USS Leary, and later went to Vietnam. Seaman Shaw is a member of the American Legion Post 369, VFW Post 5958, both in Titusville. He's been a member of the West Hickory Volunteer Fire Department for 25 years and coached senior league ball. He's a proud son of three. He's proud of his three sons: Corey, who served in the United States Army; Chad, who served in the United States Air Force; and Gene, who retired from the United States Navy after 30 years of service. Fireman Eugene E. Shaw, thank you for your service. Petty Officer Second Class Raymond W. Dicing. Petty Officer Second Class Dicing served the United States Navy from 1969 to 1974. He took his basic training at Great Lakes Naval Base and served as a radio man. Served the USS Lawrence for 3 years and 2 years in Pensacola, Florida. He had a lot of sea duty in the Mediterranean and Caribbean seas throughout, and although the weather was very nice, he was locked in a padded room for security purposes and unable to enjoy it. Petty Officer Dicing is a member of the American Legion in Sagertown and a long-distance bus driver. Petty Officer Second Class Raymond W. Dicing, thank you for your service. First Class Petty Officer Bruce L. Engstad. First Class Petty Officer Engstad served in the United States Navy from 1964 to 1974. Took his basic training at Great Lakes Naval Base and his AIT at Pensacola, Florida, and worked as communications tech. His task was to put top secret messages on the president's desk within 3 minutes of receipt of anywhere that he came through, anywhere in the world, night or day. His security clearances started at top secret and went up from there. Petty Officer Engstad was involved with the community theater since 1980 and was a driver for the DAV for 3 years. First Class Petty Officer Bruce L. Engstad, thank you for your service. Our final quilt today. Aviation Electrician Third Class Gerald R. Peterson. You've got the biggest hurdles to get through.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Aviation Electrician number 3 Peterson served in the United States Navy from 1960 to 1964. He took his basic training at Great Lakes and served as an electrician. Served aboard the USS Sullivan, which began intensive training off the waters of Florida to prepare to cover Project Mercury space shot. On 5 May 1961, Commander Alan Shepard's space capsule, Freedom 7, passed overhead and splashed down near the USS Lake Champlain and was speedily recovered by helicopters from the carrier. Seaman Peterson was able to sit in the space capsule because he was an electrician. He later went to the Smithsonian Institute, and they had put a space capsule there on display. But when he saw it, he went to the people in charge and told them it was fake. And they agreed it was a replica. Seaman Peterson is a member of the Meadville Elks 219 VFW Vernon Central Station 3 in Conneaut Lake. He's coached baseball and softball for 35 years and is the head of the District Girls Softball League for 32 teams. Aviation electrician, 3rd class, Gerald R. Peterson. Thank you for your service. And my time is done. I'm going to turn it back over to Colleen.
Thank you. I don't know why I always have to adjust the mic.
You're short.
Thank you. They're tall, that's it. I'm not short, they're just tall. Well, before we award these quilts, let me go over the significance of the quilt to the veteran. I'm going to have Kathy as my Vanna as we explain these. You've got a chore. You got all directions. Each quilt has 3 layers. Each layer has a meaning to us. As you saw these quilts tonight, and as you see the one Kathy's holding, it's just a small replica. The top has many different colors, shapes, and sizes of fabric that represents the community and the many individuals that we have in it. The batting or the filling of the quilt, which I hope you never see on your quilts, veterans, is the center of the quilt. It represents our hope that the quilt will bring warmth, comfort, peace, and healing to the individual that receives it. The back of the quilt is the strength of the quilt. It supports all the other layers. It represents the strength of the recipient, the support of his or her family, our communities, and our nation. Each stitch that holds the quilt together represents the love, gratitude, and often the tears of the maker. It brings a 3-part message from our hearts. First, we honor you for your service. We honor you for leaving all that you hold dear, whether in a time of crisis or in a time of peace. Second, the quilters know freedom is not free. The cost is the dedication of lives of men and women like you, and this quilt is meant to say thank you for your service and sacrifice. Third and finally, this quilt is meant to offer you comfort and to remind you that although your family and friends cannot be with you at all times, you are always in our thoughts and prayers. Okay, if a family member isn't up here and needs to come up here, this is the time for you to come up. It gets really crowded, so if we could leave it to one. Oh, come back here. If you're going to help her, you need to come back here, sir. Oh, he could have snuck through here. Okay. The reason for this is we're going to put a family member on one end of the quilt. Wait, Denise. One family member on the end of the quilt and the quilter on the other side. You're going to take that quilt and wrap it around their shoulders and give them a big hug to show your appreciation. Okay. Go ahead. Oh, don't unfold it. The purpose for the quilting hug is so that if you're ever having a bad day, feeling alone, or battling the demons of war, you can just wrap the quilt around your shoulders again and feel the hug that you just received. And remember that you are not alone. You have the love, support, and gratitude of all of us, family, friends, quilters, community, and nation. On behalf of PA Stitchers of Valor and the entire Quilts of Valor family and a grateful nation with our deepest appreciation, we thank you for your service to our country. With each quilt also comes a pillowcase or presentation case and a certificate. The certificate states it has their name on it, the branch of the service, and the date. It says the Quilts of Valor Foundation wishes to recognize you for your service to our nation. We consider it our privilege to do so. Though we may never know the extent of your sacrifice to protect and defend the United States of America, we award you this Quilt of Valor as an expression of gratitude from a grateful nation. It has been an honor, as always, to be here today and award these Quilts of Valor and take time to recognize our veterans. Thank you for your service and sacrifice. And thank you for the invitation from Through the Eyes of a Veteran for being a part of your program again this year. This concludes our program. However, we need pictures of a group. So, and if you didn't notice, I put you in branch order. I don't know if it's alphabetical, but there's one branch here. I know the Navy's in the middle. And there's Marines, I think, down that way. Or are they that way? The Marines are that way. What's that? Air Force is down that way, but I put you in your groups. That was a challenge, but make sure you come up and thank the veterans. And before you leave, I would like my girls to line up over there. Yeah. And when you leave, make sure you say thank you to the girls for what they've done. An accomplishment I couldn't do by myself. But if you want to come up and thank the veterans, that would be great. And then thank the girls on the way out the door. Thank you all for coming.